Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. In the dark, midnight hours of November 14th, 1987, long after everyone else in the 20-story Boston skyscraper went home for the night, two lone repairmen were performing routine maintenance operations in a narrow utility shaft that ran the entire length of the building. Pulling themselves up and down on a motorized plank led by two guy wires, the techs went around on their graveyard shift, working hard in a cramped space while suspended nearly 8 stories above the floor of the shaft, their feet hanging off the plank, dangling towards the treacherous blackness below. Then, suddenly, a spark lit the darkness. The motorized hum of the repair car came to an abrupt stop, leaving only silence. The techs were now dangerously stuck, suspended nearly 100 feet from the ground. They immediately slammed the emergency button. Less than an hour later, a crowbar jammed between the doors of the access shaft just a few stories above the repair techs' heads. Through the door emerged Eddie Loder of Boston Fire Department Rescue 1,
Hey boys!
geared up with full rappelling equipment, ready for action. Without hesitation, the veteran rescue man clipped in and dropped down the treacherous repair shaft, cracking a joke to the repair techs as he calmly lowered himself down a narrow, wire-filled, poorly lit utility shaft 10 stories off the ground in a single-minded attempt to save the lives of two complete strangers he'd just met 5 seconds ago.
Hold on to me,
He said,
I'm gonna get you out of here.
"Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. And
Hello.
Hi, Pat. And today we have a special guest joining us. We are joined, you might know him from Late Night History. It started as a kind of a micro blog, and now it's a podcast and a YouTube show. He was also a writer for the Coffee or Die blog at the Black Rifle Coffee Company. I would like to welcome Matt Freitas to the show. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been a fan of Ben's for many years. I had him on my podcast, and the person that we're going to talk about tonight, I learned first about reading about him on Badass of the Week. So,
is that how you came across the story?
That is how I came across the story, and that was probably when I was maybe in high school, and then later on in my life, I became a professional writer. And like you said, I was at Coffee or Die, and I had the opportunity to, when I was there, I'd write about military history and firefighters and cops. And I'm from Massachusetts, and I read about this person named Eddie Loder, and he's kind of a legend at the Boston Fire Department. And since I was in Massachusetts, I had the opportunity to go and meet him in person. And I met him at this place called the Liars Club. And the Liars Club is located on Moon Island in Quincy, Massachusetts. So it's kind of like the fire training ground for firefighters.
Huh.
And it's called the Liars Club because it's old retired firefighters that go and meet and have coffee and swap stories from the glory days and sometimes tell a few lies. So
Yeah. Some fisherman's tales here. Although for the guy we're talking about today, there's not much of that. A lot of his big rescues that made him the most famous firefighter in Boston Fire Department history. A lot of them were extremely public and with lots of witnesses. So he had to probably tell fewer lies than some of the other people there. But that's awesome.
Yeah.
You kind of took the journalism to a degree further than I did, where you found the guy and talked to him. So that was, I listened to your episode. You interviewed him for the podcast for Late Night History.
That's
and
right.
So he sounds exactly like I imagined he would sound. I've noticed.
salty.
Yes.
Yes.
Very,
in all senses of the word.
yes, very strong Boston accent. I had come across this story. I don't know. I probably wrote about him 10 years ago, 2012. I think I wrote that article. So 12 years ago, I wrote about him. I had come across it because firefighting is one of those professions that is just kind of already badass. You don't really have to get too much into it. Like, I'm a firefighter. All right, that's pretty badass. You run into burning buildings and help people. I don't need to know too much more. But I was thinking, as much as we can all agree that firefighters are badass, it was hard to name
who's the most badass firefighter? Who is a badass firefighter? So I had come across the story by basically going through, I looked up basically what's the firefighting Medal of Honor, what's the highest awards for firefighting that they give. And there's one called the Walter Scott Medal of Valor. And I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good. I will read the citations of people who received that. And this was one of the stories that Matt's going to tell us about. That was one that jumped out to me where I was like, okay, this is interesting. And it was it was his 4th nomination for this medal. And I was like, okay, sounds great. Let's look about this. Let's look more into this guy. But that's awesome. Yeah, I love that you came across it through the website. That really is surprising. I do these comic book conventions and stuff, and some grown men will come up to me and be like, I was reading you when I was in middle school. I'm like, oh, you have a 10-year-old kid now.
How old does that make us? Yeah.
But yeah, so I was on Matt's show. We kind of talked about the history of Badass, and you guys can definitely go on his feed and check that out. So Matt, why don't you give us kind of a general overview of Eddie Loder and his background and what he's all about.
So Eddie Loder, he's born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. There was a fire station down the street from where he grew up, and all those firefighters were World War II veterans. So he naturally looked up to them and kind of wanted to be them. And
that's funny, right? Because you think everybody looks up to the firefighter, firefighters. And the firefighers I was looking up to these guys. They were the real badasses,
Totally.
We had it easy. We had we have cell phones. They had to crank the stuff by themselves in the old days.
Yeah, and in 1970, he was appointed to the Boston Fire Department at 21 years old. He was at Ladder Company 2 in East Boston. He was at Ladder Company 15 in Back Bay, but he didn't really become a legend until he went to Rescue Company 1. And he served at Rescue Company 1 for over 25 years.
And that's kind of the rescue teams for these big cities. So I've talked about a guy named Jack Pritchard who was on Rescue 1 in New York City. He has some crazy stories also. And, Rescue 1 is the ladders they show up to put out the fires, and the rescues are there are people stuck here and we need to go get them out. And that is a whole other degree of danger to take those jobs. And you kind of have to be extremely brave and extremely good at what you're doing, physically fit. It's very demanding work.
Yeah. You have to be extremely brave, extremely fit, and also extremely skillful, because I would imagine that there are things you have to do and choices you have to make when you're dealing with human beings as opposed to just a building.
That's right. Yeah, you can't just you want to get those people out there, and you have to make those decisions under very extreme conditions. I don't know how much the gear weighs, but it seems like it's heavy, and you can't see, and it's hot, and you're having a hard time breathing because you're breathing through the oxygen tank, and you're not convinced when the building is not going to be structurally sound any longer. And even when you're in the buildings, from my understanding, you don't have a great feel of how the rest of the building is doing. So you're kind of relying on radio communications with the guys outside to tell you okay, time to go.
And another point to add is these guys have all their firefighter equipment on, plus they're carrying sledgehammers and saws and ropes and stuff. So they have to get into they're carrying all this weight, as you're saying.
Yeah. I don't even think about the other stuff that they have to carry. They have an axe, but they got to put that axe somewhere when they're trying to carry another person out. So they've got the oxygen tanks, the mask, it's hard to see out the thing, carrying a person probably down a ladder,
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, so Eddie Loder served 43 years with the Boston Fire Department and 25 with Rescue 1. And
wow.
Yeah.
Is he retired now? Because he wasn't when I wrote that article. He was still on the force.
He retired in 2013.
Nice.
Well, congratulations to him.
Yes. What was it like talking to him? Because that's something that, you're doing real journalism here where you interview the person you're talking about, which is something I'm always kind of envious of. So what was he like when you went to meet him?
He's kind of larger than life. It was kind of surreal too, because I read all about him from your Badass of the Week, and then going up and shaking his hand and meeting him, and it was just really surreal. And like I said before, he had kind of this salty Boston accent, like, yeah, whatever.
I noticed that in your interview with him, you don't generally seem to have a Massachusetts accent, but you had one. It was like increasing as the episode went on.
Yeah,
as you were
brought
talking
it
to
out
him.
of me.
Yeah, because he's got a pretty strong one, and yeah, we're starting to talk a little bit more like The Departed every time.
Yeah, but he's not a very big guy. He's probably like 5'8", 5'9".
Yeah, you see that with firefighters a lot because I think it's a harder job for a huge guy. You know, these guys have to be. You know, you think, oh, okay, he's got to carry all this gear and carry another person down the stairs, but you're doing some squeezing into some tight spots, and I feel like might be a trickier job for somebody who's 6.5 feet tall. But yeah, I was trying to think, have I ever met one of the badasses I've written about in real life? I don't think it's like that common for me, but I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, when you revisit or come back to Boston, I'll have to call Eddie Loder and we'll have to try to get together.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'm definitely in for that. Okay, so we should talk about, like, you said he becomes a legend when he gets onto Rescue 1. And there's a particular incident in 1987 that gets his name in the newspapers, which is kind of rare for a firefighter. But he is part of a pretty dramatic rescue that earns him some fame.
Yes, this was the elevator shaft rescue on November 17th, 1987. And he was awarded the Roll of Merit, which is just one of those valor awards that firefighters get. And this was at the Bank of Boston. There were these two utility workers in this basket and like this 30 by 30 shaft, and they end up getting trapped in the elevator shaft.
Ooh.
So
but in the open shaft, right? Because they're on like a little like a window washing platform or something.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's nightmare fuel right there.
And they're hanging there, and it's shorted out or whatever, and they were stuck there.
Yeah, it's like an electrical shaft. It's like where the ventilation system is. It's just really sketchy. So of course they needed somebody to come to their rescue.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that presents some interesting challenges where you have two guys in a metal bucket suspended 10 to 12 stories above the ground in the dark at night. So Eddie Loder shows up.
Eddie Loder shows up. He takes a crowbar to open up the shaft. He puts on his carabiner and he has a rope, and then he rappels down to these guys. And
From above.
Whoa.
And the guy that he's talking, like, he's like so nervous because he's obviously suspended up in the air, and Eddie basically says, "Oh, like, don't worry, I got you. Just wrap your arms around me, wrap your legs around me. I got you, no problem, right?" But at the time, the guy he's rescuing is like swearing and he's flipping out because he's so like nervous and scared. And Eddie, he just jumps on Eddie and he pulls him to safety. And then he does that again with the second guy.
Huh.
And then when it's all done after that, the guy goes like, "Oh my God, you guys must do this all the time, right?" And Eddie comes back. He's like, "No, this is actually the first time." And the guy flipped out and was like, "Oh my God."
You told me you had me. It's like, I probably had you. I did have you. I knew it. I was right. Yeah, crowbars open the elevator shaft 2 stories above, rappels down, grabs the guy, and then pulls him back up, I believe. Or maybe he had to go back down a little bit further and go out below. Either way, he has to rappel like multiple stories with this other guy hanging on him and then do it again.
Yeah.
And a guy who's for legitimate reasons, freaking out.
Right.
Also.
Right. It's like a lifeguard. Like, it's like one of the most dangerous things for a lifeguard to do is rescue somebody who's drowning because they panic and they make you drown. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, he pulled that off.
Yeah, he pulls that off. Which this is, there's no other way. There was no other way to get these guys, right? And you can't leave them hanging there. You don't know what kind of condition that basket's in. You've got to get them. So he goes in and he pulls these 2 guys out. And then a couple years later, he's part of another like really high profile firefighter rescue in Boston. And this one might be my, well, it's hard to tell between this one and the next one, but this is one of my favorite stories of like in all of firefighting.
Mine too, and this was reported on in the Boston Globe. And the reporter at the time, or I think it might have been the photographer, they called it Mission Impossible. So you know that's badass.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, this is what I'm saying about like he doesn't need to be part of the Liars Club because he was
Right,
like,
he
no,
lives
it's in the papers, man. Like you can see
Yeah,
it. There's
yeah.
a picture of me doing this. So rappelling down to rescue those two guys in an elevator shaft, and the shaft is small, right? He didn't have a lot of space to maneuver, and he pulls these two guys out. But like, this beats that. This is a rappelling operation that beats that.
Definitely. This was called the Ritz-Carlton Rescue. This happened on May 30th, 1990. And this is where he was awarded that Walter Scott Medal, which is like a very high medal. And like, I think this is what kind of made him that legend. But he's 41 years old at the time. He's got 20 years on the job. He's super experienced. This is on Newbury Street, so it's kind of like a very high end. That's where all the shops are if you ever come to Boston.
Yeah. You know, the row homes, the townhouses are these nice brownstone, you know, so it's kind of historic, nice shopping area, high profile area. Yeah.
For sure. And the call comes out about a woman on the 16th floor threatening to jump. And Eddie, he was before he was on the fire service, he was a truck driver. So naturally, when he got to Rescue 1, he was driving the truck. And so when he pulls up with the fire truck, he sees the woman sitting on a windowsill with her feet dangling in the air. And so immediately, like, I think there's like cops in the hotel room, or there's cops trying to negotiate with her. So the firefighters, they sprint up 16 stories to the roof. And that's when Eddie dons what he calls his bumblebee suit, which is basically just like a rappel harness. So he goes over the ledge, and the cops tell him that she has a razor blade in her hand. And razor blades and ropes aren't a good match. So
Yes.
No.
very sketchy.
Okay, so she's up there. She's suicidal. She's threatening to jump. She's probably armed. All attempts to rescue her so far have been like thwarted, right? They knocked on the door. She's like, if you come in here, I'm going to jump. They tried to set up the bag downstairs. She's like, I'm going to jump if you try to set that up, and I can jump before you can get it set up. So she doesn't really want to be rescued. And that's like one of the crazy things about the Rescue 1 folks, is that she doesn't really seem like she wants to be rescued, but she's also, you know, there's some mental illness at work here. There's something else at work here. You know, if you can save this person, you know, it's the firefighter's job to try to save this person. And so Eddie is going to do some Mission Impossible stuff here. He's wearing a rappelling suit. He's on the roof of the building. She's on like the penthouse a couple stories below. And so then what?
So the cops inside the room, they briefly get her attention. And the minute she looks inside of the room, Eddie says he went off the roof. And when he went off the roof, he swung, kind of like John McClane in Die Hard, and hit the woman in the side and knocked her into the room and saved her life.
Yeah.
Whoa.
But then he was still dangling outside. So the cops were like, he was like telling the cops, he's like, come bring me in. Come rescue me now.
They're trying to secure the weapon. They're trying to secure the person. And he's like, I'm hanging out here.
Yeah.
I can hear him complaining about it. Like, I just hear like a Red Sox fan complaining about a pitcher. You know, that's how I envision him telling the cops to like get him off the leg, get him out of there. I can't do the accent, or I would, but I'm not good with accents. But so that's all in a day's work for Boston Fire Department, from what I understand. If you read the story beginning to end, that's totally not that weird of a thing to happen. And Yeah, so that was in 1990, and there's going to be another big rescue that comes up in 93. And we have to take a really quick break because we have to put some ads in here. But when we come back, we're going to talk about another story, and I think this one might even be crazier than the one we just did. Like they're neck and neck. The death-defying rappel, like swing in, kick the person is pretty badass, but there's also another one that's going to come up after this break that's going to be equally badass, I think. So stay with us. Hello and welcome back to Badass of the Week. We are talking about Eddie Loder, the heroic Boston firefighter, and we've seen him do several, above and beyond the Call of Duty rescues. But there's one more that happens in 1993 that puts him back on like the front page of the newspaper.
Yes, and this is known as the Boston City Hospital Rescue, which happened in April of 1993, like you mentioned. And he was awarded the Roll of Merit. And like you said, I think this like an absolutely legendary rescue. So Eddie's at Rescue 1, of course, and they were at HQ at the time when they got the call, which was right down the street from the hospital. And there was a Vietnam veteran who was, going through some trials in his life, and he was on the roof of the hospital, and he was throwing rocks at cars below and people walking on the sidewalk on Mass Ave. So the police were trying to get him, down and talk him off the ledge, per se. And they called the fire department, and Eddie showed up with ladder, I think it was ladder 17 and ladder 15, his old crew. So they had aerial ladders, and they put each aerial ladder on each side of the roof, kind of to like control him in.
Can I just pause for a moment? What exactly is an aerial ladder?
So like the ladder trucks, like where you see maybe driving down the streets of Boston, they just kind of lift the ladder up and they kind of put it on the roof. Like it's just like is that a good? It's probably a bad explanation.
No, it's the hydraulic ladders that go on the roof of a fire truck, right? Where they can raise and turn. They raise up a 45-degree angle and they turn it 90 degrees to put it up on the side of the. So like Marshall the fire dog from the Paw Patrol. He's got one of those on his truck, that kind of thing. That's where I'm at in my life right now. That's where I'm at in my parenting career. Watch a lot of Paw Patrol. But yeah, so the fire trucks with the ladders on the roof, they can raise them and lower them. They're hydraulic. Yeah. So, but you can hang them. They can hang suspended in midair, which is what's going to happen here, right?
That's right. And so, like I said, ladder 17's on one side, ladder 15's on the other, and they're trying to kind of like bring him in so he's not running around the roof being like, oh, I'm going to jump off. But like, all right, we have one firefighter ladder here, one firefighter ladder on the right. And that's when Eddie Loder gets on the ladder of ladder 15, and he goes up to the roof. And there he meets the Vietnam veteran who's yelling swears and obscenities at him and saying he's going to jump. And Eddie's kind of calm, cool, and collective. And he's kind of like, oh, why don't I give you a sandwich? We can have some lunch, because it happened middle of the day. So he's kind of trying to like decompress this guy's thoughts. But at the same time, he's just screaming and yelling and being like, I'm going to jump. So
that's a bad spot, right? And then Eddie, so the ladder is not, it's maybe touching the building, but he's up basically on the top rung, and he's not all the way up. He doesn't want to get too close to this guy, because the guy, he's been showing signs of mental illness and violence, and you really, you don't want to get too close to him, but you're going to try to rescue him if you can. Same kind of vibe as the last one we just talked about. But he's basically on the top rung of this ladder. However, I think it's something, I read it was something like 100 and something feet above the ground. So like, 8 to 9 stories above the ground, hanging there by the ladder. And this guy does not want to be rescued and is showing violent tendencies. So it's bad spot for him to be in.
That's right. And then the man decides he's going to climb over the roof onto this conduit pipe that's kind of connected to the hospital. And he takes off part of his like jacket, so he has like one arm out. And then that's when Eddie says he jumps. And just like it happens in the movies, Eddie reached out with one hand and grabbed him with his fingertips and held him 100 feet above the ground,
Wow.
which is crazy.
Yes. Yeah. Holding a ladder with one hand, because that's hard to do. Like that is something you see in the movies, like you said. Like
Yeah.
he is 100-something feet above the ground. He has both feet on the ladder, one hand grabbing onto the ladder, but I don't believe he's clipped in. And the guy jumps and he grabs him like you'd see in a movie. But I just remember thinking like, I remember being relatively young and hanging on a bar, like one of the monkey bars at school or something, and being like, how do they do this for like 20 minutes on the movies? Like, I feel like I get tired after like 6 seconds of hanging on to this thing. Like, I would never be able to hold on to a helicopter strut as it was flying away. But this guy did this in real life with this full-sized grown man. And this is what, like you said, it's the middle of the day and there are people around. Like this guy is causing a scene. There are fire trucks all over the place. There are people watching from other buildings, from the ground. The news is there. And yeah, the guy jumps and he catches him, is holding him. But this just creates a whole new scenario of problems because in the movies, they just cut away to the end and they're standing there at the bottom. But that's not how real life works.
Yes. So he's grabbing him, and then what happens?
Yeah, so the story is definitely not over. He tells the person on like the turntable that moves the ladder to lower it, but for whatever reason, he turns it horizontally. So Eddie and this man are slammed into the side of the hospital, and he kind of roughs up like his arms, and he's like, I don't know how he didn't drop him. And then eventually he tells the firefighter on the turntable. He realizes his mistake, of course, because that's like catastrophic, and he lowers him. And Eddie says that he gets about maybe 10 feet off the ground, and he just can't hold on anymore. So he drops the guy, just because he held him in the air for 100 feet, and then they get to maybe 10 feet, and he's just like completely gassed and can't hold on to him anymore.
Yeah, because you can't like get your second hand. You can't change arms. You can't reach over with your other hand because then you're going off the ladder. It's not like those things raise and lower quickly, I imagine.
No.
And yeah, like 1 second away from catastrophe. And this guy also like there's the component that like this guy might react with violence. He might not have wanted to be caught, and you might be in danger from this man that you have just rescued, right? But gets him down, drops him the last 10 feet, but he's okay. And Eddie's bleeding from being slammed against the side of the building by a hydraulic ladder, but everybody lives. Everybody's okay at the end of the story, which
that's right.
Just wild.
But just going back to your point about like the movies or maybe video games you play like Call of Duty or the Uncharted series, there's always like a one-handed grab and it just looks so easy. But like you said, in real life, like that doesn't happen ever. Like ever. This might be the only time I've ever heard it happening.
Yeah. The actor in that movie is backed up by a guide wire, right? Like they are clipped into something else and they just CGI it out at the end. That is not a thing that human beings should be able to do. Like I don't know, it didn't pull his arm out of its socket, right? Or trying to basically like single arm row like 200 pounds of person. That's intense. And that's the kind of story that keeps coming up with Eddie as we talk about him. In your interview with him, we've told some pretty wild rescues, but in your interview with him, and you were talking to him about the job that he's doing, it's good to have wins like this because it is. He was talking about some pretty dark stuff that he had seen in his years as a firefighter. That is a hard job.
Yeah, for sure. It's not all. He was definitely talking about the toll and what they see. Like he went to one of the worst plane crashes in Boston's history. The former unit that he was at, I think it was Ladder 15. There was a fire and a building collapse, and the building collapsed on the fire truck, and sadly 9 firefighters were killed. So it's been train crashes, car accidents. It's definitely, the newspapers try to write about like the good stuff, highlighting what he's done, but he's also seen some stuff in his life that show the realism of it.
Yeah.
I have a few friends that do that work as firefighters, and that's kind of what they say too. It's like it's hard. It's physically demanding, and mentally demanding in terms of focus, but also like exhausting in that way as well. That you kind of do see a lot of. You get called anytime there's some people who are in peril, and sometimes you don't. There's no way to get there in time, and you see some pretty terrible stuff, and it is an extremely dangerous job. So everybody I know who has worked as a firefighter has lost somebody on their team. So I think that is a hard part of it, but it is also, it speaks to the fortitude of these guys that he did this job for 43 years, right? And stuck with it. And I think that's pretty badass as well. There are a few other rescues that come up throughout his career, and even he's in his 40s now, but he's still out there like rescuing people. Did you talk to him about hang on? So sorry, Matt, I'm just gonna take a real quick break. We're gonna hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, and let's get right back into it. So, this guy's career, we see multiple rescues that he receives. We had talked about that Roll of Merit. He received that 4 or 5 times. He got the Walter Scott Medal. He performs all of these heroic acts. There was one in 1994 where there was a 9-alarm fire in Boston. That seems like a lot. I feel like 4-alarm hot sauce is the worst one, and 9-alarm fire is probably really bad. But there was this big structure fire on this block, and one of the guys in his unit was in the basement of the building, and they didn't know what kind of condition he was in. So Eddie went down there there was so much smoke down there that he couldn't see anything. And they were worried that the building was going to collapse pretty soon. So in order to find his guy, he basically did the Theseus with the Minotaur thing, where he took the fire hose and he traced the fire hose to find the guy. He just followed the hose to get to the guy, found him, and then led him back by tracing the fire hose back.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah. And then there was another story in 1998 where he was a woman had jumped off the Longfellow Bridge into the Charles River in the middle of winter, and he was 50 years old, but he threw on some hopefully a dry suit, and jumped into the Charles River, swam 400 feet with his gear on to find her, and then he dragged her to a fire rescue boat and resuscitated her with CPR. And he got the Roll of Merit for that rescue as well. And then Matt, you were telling us about another one, another rescue that he had in 2001 that gave him the Roll of Merit.
Yeah, that was in Charlestown. There was a 3-decker fire, and he raced up the stairs to the second floor where we found a woman severely burnt, but still alive. So naturally, what Eddie Loder does is he takes this woman out of the chair, puts her over his shoulder, and just sprints down the stairs like the true badass that he is, and gives her to the EMTs, and he was awarded the Roll of Merit for that. But the family of that woman sent him a letter basically saying thank you so much for saving her life, which is pretty cool.
Saving grandma. Yeah, that is cool. Wow. Yeah. 50 something years old, carrying this basically unconscious woman down several flights of stairs is not, it's hard work. Yeah. And so, that is kind of the vibe of Eddie Loder. And you had told a story about him getting in trouble for breaking the rules while also saving a life, which I thought really kind of summed this guy up and his idea. Like you said, he's kind of this larger than life person, and there are people like that when you meet them, you're like, this guy's badass. I don't know why, but like you could tell that this guy's. But I love the story that you were just telling us about him getting in trouble for saving a life.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly when this story took place, because when I met with Eddie Loder, he had a bunch of pictures and stuff, and obviously this picture stood out to me because it was so unique. Basically, he's kneeling down in his firefighter uniform, and there's a car accident, so he's like pulling a woman out and saving her life. But on his feet are not boots; they are Sperry boat shoes, and of course,
He just couldn't get him. Just didn't get his boots on in time.
Yeah, he said he just like had to race out of the firehouse, and he just like didn't care or realize that he was wearing Sperry boat shoes at the time. And like Eddie Loder and his like reputation, there's always a photographer nearby because he's going to be rescuing somebody, and they snapped that picture of him with the Sperry's. And after he rescued this woman, HQ called and was kind of swearing at him because they wanted to know who was the dude with the Sperry's on that made the newspaper the next day.
Oh man, yeah, that's great, right? It's just, I don't have time. We gotta go to work.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, did you have any other thoughts on Eddie? Because you did get to meet him, which is, just seems like it was an awesome experience to get to talk to the man. Did you have any other thoughts that on him after you got a chance to sit down with him for a little while and look at some of these pictures? And I like to think that like he didn't point out to you that he was wearing those shoes in that picture. You were going through a big stack of pictures, and you're like, "What's this one?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I saved this woman's life."
Yeah, pretty much.
I got in trouble for it.
Yeah, the one last thing I would say is I think it's his humility. I think that's things about people who are badass. If you meet them in person, is that when I was at the Liars Club, of course, I was like, oh, who is this like legendary character? And all the firefighters would be like, oh, the legend. And then Eddie would be in the background rolling his eyes because he's like, oh, I'm just doing my job, And that's like the epitome of a badass, being like, oh, I was just doing my job. They're not saying like, oh, I'm this like big shot guy. So
yeah, I'm awesome. Yeah, I love that. So you interview a lot of badasses. So for your show, you've got 50 something episodes now, and in each one you've kind of interview some badass person, a lot of Navy SEALs, firefighters, police officers. Me randomly, I stuck in there with all these guys, but that's like a thing that I love. Like when you read about these guys or talk to them, these guys will have been like, yeah, I rappelled off a building and kicked this person who was about to jump and save their life. And it was kind of like, you hear the story, you think Die Hard or Lethal Weapon when he's up there on the roof, like, let's jump together. And then you talk to these people or you read something that or read a quote from them and they're like, I just did what anybody else would do. Like, no, man, I don't think you did. I don't think you did what anybody else would have done there. But Matt, where can people find more of Late Night History? Where can they find more of your stuff?
Yeah, so you can find me on my microblog on Instagram at Late Night History. I have a website, latenichthistorypodcast.com. And my podcast, Late Night History, is on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
And we can still find a lot of your writings are still up at Black Rifle also, right?
That's right. That'd be at coffeeordie.com. And I think the / is just like my name, Matt Freitas. So.
All right. Well, Matt, I want to thank you so much for coming on and telling us this great story. It was super fun to have you on. And we'd love to have you back at some point in the future, if that sounds good to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be on the Badass of the Week podcast, and I would love to come back on the show, maybe discuss like Navy SEALs or something that you would have in mind.
That sounds great. All right. Well, I guess that is our show for today. Pat, thank you also for being on the show. And you know, we do these every week. So please do stay tuned. If you like what you guys have heard, please do like and subscribe and do all that stuff. I hate asking people to do this. It's one of the parts of the job that I do not enjoy. However, we do need you to do that stuff because it really does help the show out. So thank you guys so much as always for listening. And we will see you next week with another Badass.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.